They struck a human ambassador, never expecting humanity to rise in fury. The blow came before I had finished speaking. I remember the exact moment. I was mid-sentence, standing at the curved podium of the Grand Conclave Chamber on Breath Station, saying something about mutual resource agreements and shared lane rights through the Kepler corridor. My voice was steady. My hands were folded behind my back, the way Ambassador Harlan Price had trained me to stand, open posture, no threat, no challenge. And then the High Chancellor of the Vreth Dominion, a creature named Vorak Thane, crossed the floor in 4 long strides and struck me across the face with the back of his hand. The sound of it rang through the chamber. I did not fall. I want to be clear about that. I am Ilara Voss, appointed Ambassador of Earth and the Unified Human Colonies, and I did not fall. My head snapped to the right. I felt the sting bloom across my left cheek. I tasted something iron-warm at the corner of my mouth. And I stood still. The chamber went silent in the way that only 300 alien dignitaries can be silent. The kind of silence that has weight. That has texture. Not a single translator clicked. Not a single delegate shifted in their seat. Vorak Thane returned to his elevated seat at the head of the Dominion row. He sat down slowly, deliberately, and folded his 4 arms across his chest in the Vreth gesture that their translators rendered as satisfied conclusion. He had made his point. Humanity was young, small, and newly arrived at this table. Humanity could be touched without consequence. He believed that. I straightened my posture. I looked at the full chamber, 300 pairs of eyes from 41 species, all watching me. Some looked away. Some watched with something that might have been pity. None spoke. I turned back to my earpiece and pressed the single private channel that connected me directly to command on Earth. The channel was encrypted 12 ways and routed through 4 relay buoys. It was the most secure line in known space. I said one word into it. Acknowledged. Then I picked up my notes, thanked the chamber for its time, and asked that the session recess for the evening. 41 species filed out of that room thinking they had just watched humanity swallow an insult and say nothing. They were wrong about what nothing means. I had been assigned to the conclave 18 months earlier, the youngest human diplomat ever given a primary seat at a galactic forum. People back home thought it was an honor. My mother sent flowers to my office when the appointment was announced. My old professor at the institute, a man named Gordon Webb, sent a handwritten letter saying he was proud. I kept both. What most people did not know, what was not in any public briefing, was that Ambassador Harlan Price had specifically requested me for this post. Not because I was brilliant. Not because I had the best record. He requested me because in my 3rd year of diplomatic training, during a live simulation exercise where an actor playing a hostile delegate threw a folder of documents in my face and shouted at me, I had remained completely still for 11 seconds before responding calmly. 11 seconds is a long time when you are being screamed at. Harlan Price had been watching from behind the observation glass. He flagged my file that afternoon. He told me later, over very bad coffee in a very small office, that the galaxy was full of species who would test humanity. Who would push us? Who would look for the exact moment we flinched, because the moment we flinched, they would own us at every table for the next 100 years. Your job, he said, stirring his coffee slowly, is not to negotiate. Not yet. Your job is to be unbreakable in front of them. When they finally see that we do not break, that is when the real conversation begins. I had thought I understood him then. Standing in the chamber with my cheek still burning, I understood him completely. The Vreth Dominion controlled 19 star systems. They had been the dominant power in this region of the galaxy for roughly 400 years. They had a habit, documented but rarely discussed, of establishing their authority over newcomers through what their own cultural texts called a gesture of placement. A physical act designed to tell a new species exactly where it stood. They had done it to 3 other species in recorded conclave history. 2 of those species had reacted with immediate hostility and been politically isolated for decades. 1 had said nothing and been treated as a servant class for generations. Vorak Thane had studied those outcomes. He had chosen the option that gave him maximum control with minimum effort. He had struck me because every calculation he had ever run told him it was the correct move. He had never run a calculation that included what humanity does when one of its own is struck. After the session recessed, I walked alone through the curved white corridors of Wreath Station. My personal aide, a young man named Oliver Grant, fell into step beside me. He was 24 years old, very earnest, and at that moment very pale. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "I have to ask." "Do not ask," I said. "Walk with me." We walked for several minutes in silence. The station's artificial gravity was slightly heavier than Earth standard. I had never quite gotten used to it. My feet always felt slightly too heavy here, as if the station itself was trying to hold me down. My earpiece gave a single soft tone. Then a voice I recognized, Admiral Douglas Crane, speaking from the UHC Joint Command Center in Geneva, his tone so measured it sounded almost conversational, said, "Ambassador Voss, Doctrine Ember is active as of this timestamp. Thank you for the signal. Stand by and stand well." Oliver looked at me. He did not know what Doctrine Ember was. He did not have the clearance. Most people did not. I looked straight ahead and kept walking. "Ambassador," Oliver said, almost a whisper, "are you all right?" I considered the question honestly. My cheek ached. My pulse had been elevated for the past 20 minutes. And somewhere deep in my chest, in the place where very old and very patient things live, something had been set in motion that I knew would not stop until it had finished. "I am fine," I said. "Order dinner. We have a long night of reports to write." He nodded, still pale, and did as I asked. I stopped at the corridor window and looked out at the stars. Wreath Station orbited a pale orange gas giant, and the planet's rings caught the nearby sun's light in long silver arcs. It was genuinely beautiful. I thought about Harlan Price. I thought about my mother's flowers. I thought about Gordon Webb's letter and the phrase he had used at the end of it, "Carry us well out there, Ilara." I pressed my fingertips against the cold glass. Out there among those stars, at that exact moment, though I would not know the details until much later, 37 human fleet commanders were opening sealed orders that had been sitting in encrypted lockboxes for 9 years. I did not smile. There was nothing to smile about. What was beginning was not a happy thing. It was a necessary thing, which is different. I turned from the window and went to write my reports. 18 months before that evening on Wreath Station, there had been a small room deep inside a mountain in Colorado. No windows. One door with 7 physical locks and 1 biometric seal. The room contained 12 people and a great deal of coffee. Ambassador Harlan Price sat at the head of a bare metal table. I was there as his senior aide. Admiral Douglas Crane sat across from me, a man who looked like someone had carved him from old wood, solid, weathered, and utterly still. The meeting lasted 6 hours. At the end of it, I understood 3 things that changed how I saw everything. The first thing, humanity had been watching the Wreath Dominion for 22 years. Not diplomatically. Not publicly. Quietly. Patiently. Every ship movement logged. Every resource claim catalogued. Every gesture of placement they had ever made against every species they had ever dominated, documented, analyzed, and filed in a database that had no official name and no official existence. The second thing, humanity had not shown the galaxy what it was truly capable of. Not even close. The ships we sent to conclave sessions were real but modest. The fleets those delegates saw were perhaps a quarter of what existed. The manufacturing output we reported was accurate but incomplete. For 20 years, every human colony that built ships had been building 2 kinds, the kind that showed up on public records, and the kind that did not. It was not deception for its own sake. It was exactly what Harlan Price had described to me over bad coffee: patience as strategy, restraint as preparation. The third thing, Doctrine Ember, was a single compressed signal, 12 characters long, routable through any encrypted channel, that activated a response so large and so carefully prepared that it had no parallel in human history. It did not require a vote. It did not require a second authorization. It had been designed by people who understood that there would come a moment when there was no time for process, and that the person in the room would need only one tool in their hand. One word. Acknowledged. And the machine would begin. I asked Harlan Price, at the end of that 6-hour meeting, how long the machine had been waiting. He looked at me across the table and said, 9 years, 3 months, and 11 days. I did not speak for a moment. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Why tell me? Why now? He looked at his hands, then back at me. Because you are going to that station, and something is going to happen there. I do not know exactly what. But I know Vorik Thane. I have read everything he has ever said or done or authorized. And I know that when he sees you, young, human, standing at his table, he will not be able to help himself. And you need me to send the signal when it happens. I need you to survive it, he said. The signal is secondary. You surviving it is primary. Are we clear? I nodded. He leaned forward. And Ilara, do not send the signal unless he actually does it. Not a threat. Not an insult. The actual act. Because once that word leaves your mouth, there is no stopping what comes next, and we will have to live with it forever. I understand, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. I know you do. That's why you're going. I thought about that conversation a great deal in the weeks after the strike. I thought about it while I sat in the conclave sessions, day after day, completely composed, representing human interests in trade corridor disputes and resource allocation panels and the 100 small bureaucratic functions that fill a diplomat's time. Vorik Thane watched me from his elevated seat. I could feel it. He was looking for cracks. He had hit me and I had said nothing, in his experience, that meant I had accepted the placement. That meant I was manageable. He did not know what acknowledged meant. On the 5th day after the strike, a conclave floor aide slipped a note to Oliver Grant during a recess. Oliver read it, blanched slightly, and passed it to me. The note was from a senior delegate of the Salthene Accord, a species I had always found reasonable. Their lead negotiator was a measured, careful individual named Suvekori, known for saying very little and meaning all of it. The note said only, we know something is different. We are not asking what. We are telling you that when the time comes, the Salthene Accord will not stand in the way. That is all we can offer. We hope it is enough. I folded the note and slid it into my jacket pocket. Oliver watched me. Ambassador, what does that mean? It means we are not as alone as they think we are, I said. He nodded slowly, processing. Then, who is they in that sentence? I almost smiled. Almost everyone in this building. On the 7th day, I received the first indirect confirmation from Admiral Crane. It came through my encrypted channel as a routine weather report from a buoy relay station, except that the temperature figures embedded in the 3rd paragraph, when converted through the cipher Crane and I had agreed on, read, all 37 commands confirmed active. Positioning complete in 16 systems. Standing by. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. On the 9th day, Vorik Thane made a public statement at the opening of the morning session. His translator rendered it as a clarification of Dominion policy regarding new member species. But his cultural aides had clearly not flagged what it actually was, a formal declaration, in Vreth traditional terms, of human subordinate status. He was codifying the gesture of placement. Making it permanent in the conclave record. I listened to all of it without moving. When he finished, 3 other species, small ones that had their own long histories of being subordinated by the Vreth, lowered their visual communication panels and did not look up for the rest of the session. They were demonstrating that they accepted the statement. That it was now simply the way things were. 41 species. And humanity sat quietly, with the same pleasant expression I had been wearing for 9 days, while the galaxy watched and concluded that the math was settled. In the break after that session, I walked to a private communication alcove, pressed the button on my earpiece, and said to Admiral Douglas Crane, in a calm and ordinary voice, "How are we looking?" There was a pause of about 2 seconds, which was the relay delay. Then Crane said, "Perfect. Waiting on your word." I thought about Harlan Price's face in that mountain room in Colorado, telling me to survive it first. I thought about the Salthene note folded in my jacket pocket. I thought about Gordon Webb's letter. "Carry us well out there, Ilara." "Give me 4 more days," I said. "I have one more thing I need to do before we move." "Understood," Crane said. 4 days. I closed the channel. I walked back to the chamber. I sat down in the human delegation seat and folded my hands on the table, and I prepared very carefully for what those 4 days would contain. Because what I needed to do was not send ships. What I needed to do first was give Vorik Thane every possible chance to step back from what was coming. Not because I doubted what was coming, but because when this was over, and it would be over, one way or another, I wanted every record in the galaxy to show that we had given him the chance. That humanity had offered the door, and he had chosen to walk past it. That matters. Even when the outcome is already written, that matters. I requested a private meeting with the High Chancellor of the Vreth Dominion. I worded the request as a desire to discuss the path forward for human-Vreth relations. I used the Vreth formal title system correctly, every syllable, which I had spent 4 months learning. I sent it through proper channels. His office responded within the hour. He would see me in 3 days. I spent those 3 days preparing something that had taken me 9 months to write. I printed it on paper, actual paper, human paper, white with a faint blue watermark of the Earth emblem in the corner. I had brought 200 sheets of it with me from home, and I had never told anyone why. I was going to tell him exactly what was coming. Every detail. Every number. Every consequence. And then I was going to watch him decide. The private meeting room that Vorik Thane chose was on the upper tier of Vreth Station, a room with a full observation wall facing the gas giant and its beautiful silver rings. I suspected he chose it deliberately, to remind me of where we were, whose station this was, who held the elevated position in the galaxy's order of things. It did not work the way he intended. I arrived 4 minutes early. I was wearing the formal dark blue of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, no insignia except the small silver pin on my lapel that indicated senior ambassador rank. I carried the printed document in a plain folder. I carried nothing else. Vorik Thane arrived exactly on time, which told me he had been nearby and waiting. He was flanked by 2 aides and a protocol officer, which told me he had decided this was a formal occasion. He took his seat on the elevated Vreth chair. Everything in Vreth design was built slightly higher on their side, to maintain the physical impression of looking down, and regarded me. Ambassador Voss, his translator rendered. I am told you wish to discuss the path forward. I did, I said. Thank you for making time. He made the Vreth gesture for acknowledging a minor courtesy. Like nodding at someone who held a door. I want to be honest with you, I said. I believe directness serves both of us better than formality at this stage. Proceed. I opened the plain folder and placed the document on the table between us. It was 41 pages. I had numbered every page by hand. This is the United Human Colonies Declaration of Sovereign Reckoning, I said. It is a legal and philosophical document, filed under Conclave Charter Article 19, subsection 4, which deals with acts classified as civilizational contempt between member species. I have already submitted a sealed copy to the Conclave Legal Archive. This copy is for you. He looked at the document. He did not reach for it. What you did 11 days ago in the chamber, I said, has a formal classification under that article. My legal team, and we have very good lawyers, Chancellor, has built a case that meets every threshold the article requires. Witness records from 41 delegations. Medical documentation of the physical contact. Translation records confirming that no provocation preceded the act. The case is complete. Vorik Thane said nothing. His forearms remained folded. But one of his aides, standing just behind his left shoulder, shifted weight from one foot to the other. I noted it. The document also contains something else, I said. A full inventory of what humanity has positioned in the 16 systems surrounding Vreth Dominion space. Ship classes, complement counts, armament ratings, and coordinated strike capability. I want you to read it carefully, because I have not exaggerated a single number. What is written there is exactly what is waiting. Now he looked at me. Not at the document. At me. The gas giant outside the window caught the sun at that moment, and the rings lit up silver white, flooding the room with soft reflected light. Vorik Thane was lit by it. His gray-green face was very still. You are making a claim, he said finally, his translator voice flat, that humanity has a military force capable of. I am not making a claim, I said. I am informing you of a fact. There is a difference. He reached for the document then. He opened it to the inventory section. I had tabbed it, because I am a thorough person, and his eyes moved across the numbers. I watched him read. I watched the moment, about 40 seconds in, when his expression changed. It was subtle. The Vreth do not show surprise easily. But there is a stillness that replaces movement when a mind is recalibrating everything it thought it knew, and I saw it settle over him like a change in weather. He turned more pages. He reached the fleet positioning map, which I had rendered clearly in 3 colors, blue for current Vreth territory, gray for neutral space, and red for every coordinate where a human fleet unit was already sitting and waiting. There was a great deal of red. One of his aides took a small step forward. Vorik Thane raised one hand without looking up, and the aide stopped. He read for 4 minutes without speaking. I sat and let him read. The rings outside the window were very bright. When he finally looked up, he was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want?" he said. "I want to give you a choice," I said. "The first option is a formal Vreth public retraction of the gesture of placement, entered into the conclave record, accompanied by a written acknowledgement of human sovereign equality under the Charter. In exchange, the legal case is filed but not activated, the fleet positions are held but not advanced, and we proceed from this moment as equals at the table. Your Dominion's standing is not destroyed. It is simply adjusted." He said nothing. "The second option," I said, "is that you decline. And then what is in that document becomes the reality of the next several weeks." The room was very quiet. Outside, the gas giant turned slowly, enormous and indifferent. "You came here alone," he said. "One ambassador. Representing a species that has been part of this conclave for less than 30 years. And you are sitting here telling me." "I am sitting here giving you a choice," I said. "That is all. What you do with it is entirely yours." He looked at me for a long time. I did not look away. The silver light from the rings fell across the table between us, across the 41 pages of everything we had built in secret and in patience, and I thought about Harlan Price saying do not send the signal unless he actually does it, and I thought about how long 9 years and 3 months and 11 days actually is when you are building something in the dark that no one knows is coming. Vorik Thane pushed the document back across the table toward me. "I will give you my answer," he said, "after I have consulted my admirals." I picked up the document and placed it back in the plain folder. I stood. "Of course," I said. "I will be in my quarters." I walked to the door. Before I reached it, I paused and turned back. "Chancellor," I said. "One piece of advice, offered genuinely." He waited. "Consult them quickly," I said. "My patience for waiting has already been used." I left the room, walked down the long corridor, took the transit pod back to the human delegation level, entered my quarters, sat down on the edge of my bunk, and for the first time in 11 days, let out a long, slow breath. Oliver was waiting outside the door. He knocked twice. "Come in," I said. He entered, looked at my face, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "How did it go?" "We gave him the door," I said. "Now we find out what kind of man he is." Oliver sat down across from me. He was quiet for a while. Then, carefully, "What if he walks through it?" "Then we have done something good," I said. "And if he doesn't?" I looked at the plain folder in my hands. I thought about 37 fleet commanders with open sealed orders, and 16 systems with red coordinates, and 9 years of patience that had been building toward a single point in time like water behind a dam. "Then we have done something necessary," I said. Oliver nodded slowly. He understood, I think, more than I had ever told him. He was a perceptive young man. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The station hummed around us, neutral and vast, full of species who thought the matter was already settled, who thought humanity had swallowed what it was given and learned its place. My earpiece gave one soft tone. It was Admiral Crane. He said nothing except, "Ready when you are." I closed my eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then I opened them. "For more hours," I said into the earpiece. "Give him 4 more hours." 4 hours, Crane confirmed. And then quiet. I set the folder on the small desk beside my bunk. I lay back and stared at the ceiling of my quarters on Vreth Station, in the dark, and I waited for Vorik Thane to decide the shape of the next chapter of history. It took him 2 hours and 40 minutes. His answer came not from him personally but from his protocol officer, delivered in writing to the human delegation through the conclave's official message system. I read it on my tablet. It was formal, dense, and technically worded in a way that could mean almost anything. But the core of it was clear. He was not retracting anything. He was offering, instead, a joint statement that acknowledged our meeting had taken place and expressed hope for productive future dialogue. He had walked past the door. I sat with the tablet in my hands for a long moment. Then I set it down, stood, opened my earpiece channel, and said to Admiral Douglas Crane in a calm and ordinary voice, "Douglas. It's time." There was a brief pause. "Understood, Ambassador," he said. "It's time. I want to be honest about what the next 72 hours were. They were not exciting in the way that the recordings later made them seem. There were no dramatic announcements over Vreth Station's intercom. There was no moment where Vorik Thane strode into the conclave chamber and I stood before him in some kind of confrontation with the stars blazing behind us. Real events are almost never like recordings of them. What actually happened was much quieter, and in many ways much more precise. I returned to the conclave chamber for the regular morning session the following day. I sat in the human delegation seat. I had my tablet, my notes, and the plain folder, which I had brought with me and placed visible on the table in front of me. The Vreth delegation arrived. Vorik Thane took his elevated seat. He looked at me. I looked at him. Nothing happened. The session began. It was a discussion of deep space lane assignments for commercial traffic in the outer Kepler sectors. I participated. I made 2 reasonable points about human shipping interests and received 2 reasonable responses. The session proceeded in the way that conclave sessions proceed, slowly and with great procedural care. 40 minutes into the session, the lights on the Vreth diplomatic communications panel lit up. It was a small thing. A row of indicator lights on the edge of the delegation desk, connected to their encrypted command network. I had made it my business to learn what every light on that panel meant, over the 18 months I had been in this chamber. The row that lit up was the one their military attachés used for priority communications. I kept my eyes on the moderating delegate and continued listening to the lane assignment discussion. 60 seconds later, the lights lit up again. Different pattern. Faster. One of the Vreth junior aides leaned to the senior aide and whispered something. The senior aide's body language changed in a way that I had not seen before in 18 months of watching them. He sat very still for a moment. Then he leaned to the protocol officer. The protocol officer looked at Vorik Thane. The High Chancellor was watching the lane assignment discussion with perfect composure. His protocol officer placed a tablet in front of him. He read it without moving. He read it for a very long time for something so small. Then he set the tablet face down on the desk. The session continued. No one in the room, except me, knew that anything had changed. What had changed was this. At that moment, as I would learn in full detail in the weeks that followed, 37 human fleet divisions had completed their positioning in 16 systems simultaneously. Not a dramatic charge. Not a sudden appearance. They had been moving slowly and carefully for weeks, staying below sensor threshold, using navigation corridors that the Vreth traffic models never monitored closely because no one who mattered had ever used them. They had arrived the way a tide arrives. Quietly, continuously, and all at once. The Vreth military network had registered their presence at approximately the same moment. The calculations their systems ran took about 40 seconds. The conclusions those calculations produced were sent immediately to every Vreth command post in the region, and from there to Vorik Thane's tablet, and that was what he had read while the session continued and the moderating delegate talked about lane assignments. He now knew that the inventory in my 41-page document was accurate. He now knew that the map with the red coordinates was accurate. And he now knew, with the certainty that military mathematics provide, that if he activated a countermeasure response, the engagement geometry meant that his forces would not win. That is a very specific kind of knowledge to carry while sitting in a diplomatic chamber discussing lane assignments. I did not look at him. I looked at the moderating delegate. About 20 minutes later, Vorik Thane requested a recess. 30 minutes, he said. Personal consultation. The moderating delegate granted it. Delegates began filing into the corridor. I stayed in my seat. I took out my tablet and made notes on the Lane assignment discussion as if nothing had happened. Oliver Grant, sitting one seat behind me, leaned forward slightly. "Ambassador," he said very quietly. "I know," I said, equally quietly. "They know," he said. "Yes. What happens now?" I continued writing my notes. "Now he has 30 minutes to decide if he is the kind of leader who learns, or the kind who doesn't. Either way, we proceed." Oliver sat back. After a moment, "You are very calm." "I was very angry 11 days ago," I said. "I have had 11 days. He was quiet at that. When the chamber refilled after the recess, Vorik Thane returned to his seat. He looked different in a way I cannot fully describe. Not diminished. The Vreth do not diminish easily. But there was something in the way he positioned himself that was subtly less performed than usual. He was not sitting for an audience. He was sitting because he had decisions to make and the chamber was where he had to make them. The session resumed. Lane assignments. 40 minutes after that, at 14:32 station time, I opened my encrypted channel to Admiral Crane under the cover of appearing to review documents on my tablet, and I said, "Begin the primary documentation phase. No engagement unless directly threatened. Every move goes into the record. Everything." "Understood," Crane said. Documentation active. What that meant, and this was something I had built into Doctrine Ember years before, during the planning meetings in Colorado, something I had fought for and eventually won, was that every action taken by every human fleet unit in all 16 systems would be recorded, cataloged, time-stamped, legally annotated, and transmitted in real time to the Conclave Legal Archive, to the Human Public Record, and to the neutral observer stations operated by the Salthene Accord, who had quietly agreed to serve as independent witnesses. We were not going to do this the way powerful groups had done it throughout history, suddenly, without explanation, with the facts emerging slowly and incompletely afterward. We were going to do it in full light. Every movement publicly documented. Every coordinate logged. Every order traceable to its source. Because this was not about power. It was about accountability. And accountability requires a record. In the following 48 hours, human fleet units in 16 systems executed a series of coordinated actions against Vreth military infrastructure that I can only describe as surgical. No civilian installations were touched. No inhabited structures. No commercial vessels. Every action was targeted at military assets only, command relays, weapons platforms, defensive grid nodes, supply depots that served exclusively military functions. Each target was assessed against a pre-built legal framework that our military lawyers had spent 4 years constructing, cross-referencing the Conclave's own rules of engagement protocols and the Vreth Dominion's own military law to ensure that every single thing we did was not only justified but demonstrably justified by standards the Vreth themselves had helped write. I know how that sounds. It sounds cold. It sounds procedural. It was. Deliberately. Because we understood something that the Vreth, with their 400 years of dominance, had never had to learn. You do not only need to win. You need to be right, demonstrably and permanently, in a way that the record shows clearly for everyone who comes after. Winning without the record is just violence. Winning with the record is precedent. While all of this happened in the systems beyond, I remained in the chamber. I attended every session. I spoke when appropriate, listened when appropriate, and gave no indication that I was monitoring a continuous stream of encrypted updates through my earpiece. The Vreth delegation's body language changed hour by hour, subtle shifts that told me their military command was giving them increasingly complicated information to process. On the second day, Vorik Thane did not appear for the morning session. His senior aide attended in his place. This was unprecedented in my 18 months of experience. The Vreth Chancellor did not miss sessions. His presence was a statement in itself. His absence was a louder one. On the second day, I did something that I had planned from the beginning and that Harlan Price had specifically asked me to include. I requested the floor for a formal address to the full conclave. This is a procedure that any senior ambassador can invoke once per quarter. I had not used mine yet. The moderating delegate recognized me. I stood. I had no notes. I had memorized what I needed to say. Members of the conclave, I said, and waited for the translation clicks to settle. 41 species, gathered here in the belief that this forum represents the best way for different peoples to share space and resolve differences peacefully. I believe that too. I have believed it since I was 22 years old and first applied to the Diplomatic Institute on Earth. My dedication to this room, and to what it represents, is not complicated or conditional. I paused. 21 days ago, in this chamber, the High Chancellor of the Vreth Dominion struck me. You were all present. The act is in the record. I am not going to describe it further, because I do not need to. What I want to tell you is what happened after, and why. I looked at them. Every delegation. Every pair of eyes. Humanity did not act in rage. We did not react immediately or without thought. We gave every opportunity for the matter to be addressed through the mechanisms this conclave provides. We met privately. We offered a path that would have required only an honest acknowledgement and a commitment to equality. That offer was declined. I placed my hand on the folder in front of me. What is happening in 16 systems right now is documented completely and transmitted to this archive in real time. You can read it. Every delegate, every observer, every legal officer. Nothing is hidden. Nothing is obscured. We ask only that it be read carefully, because it is the record of a species that was struck and chose to respond with precision and accountability rather than anger. I sat down. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then the moderating delegate asked if any delegation wished to respond. The Salfine Accord delegate, Suvekori, slowly raised the recognition panel. He was given the floor. He said 4 sentences. His translator rendered them as, the Salfine Accord has served as an independent witness to the actions of the past 48 hours. We confirm that the human documentation is accurate and complete. We confirm that every action documented is consistent with the legal framework submitted in advance to the Conclave archive. We have nothing further to add. He lowered the panel. No other delegation spoke. What ended the active phase was not a great final confrontation. It was a meeting in a small room. On the morning of the 4th day after I had said it is time to Admiral Crane, I received a formal request from the Vreth Dominion for a closed session between their senior delegation and the human ambassador. The request used specific language from Conclave Charter Article 22, which governs the opening of surrender negotiations between member states. They had chosen the word. Not me. I accepted. The room they chose this time was not the one with the beautiful view of the gas giant. It was a plain meeting room on the neutral tier of Vreth Station, beige walls, and a table with 6 chairs. I arrived with Oliver and 2 members of my legal team, a woman named Grace Holton, who had the sharpest legal mind I have ever encountered, and a senior analyst named Philip Utteret, who was so quiet and precise that half the conclave staff did not know he existed. The Vreth delegation arrived. Vorik Thane was not among them. He had sent his second, a chancellor-designate named Forek Von, along with a military liaison and 2 legal representatives. Forek Von looked at me across the table and said, "We are prepared to discuss terms." I looked at Grace Holton, who placed a document on the table. "These are ours," I said. "Please read them completely before responding." They read. It took some time. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the station's systems. I thought about a great many things during that silence. I thought about the Vreth subordinate species I had read about in the classified files, the ones who had sat at this table in smaller rooms, over smaller stakes, and heard the Vreth Dominion say we are prepared to discuss terms while having all the power. I thought about how history turns. I thought about how slowly, and then all at once. The terms were not designed to destroy the Vreth Dominion. They were designed to restructure it. Military command infrastructure in the affected systems placed under conclave oversight. A formal charter amendment enshrining the physical protection of diplomatic personnel as inviolable, with defined consequences for violation. A public statement, entered into the galactic record, acknowledging the gesture of placement as a violation of charter principles. And a formal apology to Ambassador Ilara Voss, by name, also entered into the record. That last one had been Harlan Price's addition, in the original Doctrine Ember planning documents. I had thought it unnecessary when I first read it. By the time I sat in that room, I understood why it mattered. Not for me. For the record. For the next young diplomat from some small and newly arrived species who would sit at the table in 50 years, and who would be able to look at the record and see that it had been done, and was answered completely. Forek von looked up from the document. Some of these terms extend beyond what we can authorize without. I know, I said. That is why I have submitted them to the Conclave Legal Archive as the opening position. They will be publicly visible in 6 hours. I would encourage your Dominion to engage with them quickly. He looked at me for a moment. You are very young, he said. His translator gave it a neutral tone, but I heard what it was. He was surprised. He had expected something else. Someone else. I am 31 years old, I said. My species has been in space for less than 200 years. We have been at this table for less than 30. I picked up my folder. We have time. The negotiations took 9 days. They were not easy. The Vreth had lawyers too, very good ones, and they understood every word of the charter framework. They pushed back on several terms. We held on the ones that mattered and made small concessions on the ones that did not. Grace Holton was extraordinary. Philip Aderek caught 3 attempts to embed softening language that would have created loopholes, and he caught them silently and in writing, which I found deeply satisfying. On the 9th day, in the same plain beige room with 6 chairs, we reached the final language of the agreement. Forek von signed it. Then he looked at me and said something his translator rendered as, "We did not expect this." I know, I said. That was not an accident. He considered that. Then he nodded once, gathered his documents, and left the room. I sat at the table for a few minutes after the others filed out. Oliver stayed. He always stayed. He sat in the chair across from me and watched me not say anything for a while, and then said, "Is it over?" "The active phase is over," I said. "The rest of it takes longer." He understood that, I think. Because the rest of it was not about ships or positions or legal text. The rest of it was about what the galaxy chose to make of what had happened. And that is something that unfolds in conversation after conversation, in small rooms and large chambers, in decisions made by people who were not in this room, over decades that I would not see the end of. What I knew was what we had established. Not dominance. Not revenge. A precedent. A line in the record that said, "Here is what humanity is, and here is what we will not accept, and here is how we respond when we are pushed, not with rage, not without thought, but with everything we have and everything we prepared, wielded with care." The amended charter passed the full conclave vote 22 days after the agreement was signed. It was not unanimous. 4 delegations abstained. But it passed, and the amendment was entered into the permanent record, and the word inviolable was in it, and it would stay. I sent a message to Harlan Price the evening of the vote. It was short. It said, "The door is in the record. We got it done." He replied the next morning, also short. It said, "I never doubted you. Come home soon." I had one more thing to do before I went home. I requested, through proper channels, a final meeting with Vorik Thane. Not official. Not recorded. Just the 2 of us. He agreed. I think he was surprised that I asked. We met in the corridor outside the conclave chamber, which I chose deliberately. Public space. No elevated chairs. Just a corridor, and 2 individuals standing approximately equal distance from the floor. He was taller than me by a significant amount. The Vreth are a large species. He looked at me in the way he had looked at me that first day in the chamber, 18 months ago, when I had been a novelty. A curiosity. He looked at me differently now. "Ambassador Voss," he said. "Chancellor," I said. We stood for a moment. "I have a question," I said. "And I am asking it sincerely, not as a provocation." He waited. "What did you think would happen?" I said. "When you made the gesture. What outcome did you calculate?" He was quiet for a long time. His forearms shifted slightly. The Vreth have very expressive arms, their diplomats spend years learning to control that expressiveness. His, for once, were not fully controlled. "I calculated," he said finally, "that you were what you appeared to be." "And what did we appear to be?" "Small," he said. "Young." Eager to belong. I nodded. We are young, I said. That part was accurate. He looked at me. Something in his expression shifted in a way I had never seen from a Vreth official. It was not quite respect. It was something adjacent to it. A recalibration, maybe. The moment when a mind that has been running one model for a very long time is forced to load a different one. What do you want from this conversation? He said. Nothing official, I said. I wanted to tell you something, person to person, before I leave this station. He waited. We are not what we appeared to be, I said. But we are also not what you will now be tempted to make us in your mind, some kind of hidden threat that had been disguising itself all along. That is not right either. We are just people. A young species, with all the things that means. We get angry. We make mistakes. We love our children and argue with our neighbors and build things and break things and try to learn from the difference. I looked at him steadily. We also protect our own. Every human species since before we left our home planet has understood that one completely. When you struck me, you struck something that humanity had agreed, a long time ago, was not available to be struck without consequence. He was very still. I am not asking you to admire that, I said. I am just asking you to know it. For the next time. So that whoever comes after you does not have to learn it the same way you did. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You are a very careful person, Ambassador." I try to be, I said. It is unusual, he said, in someone with the kind of resources you apparently have available. I know, I said. I think that is the point. We stood in the corridor for another moment. Then I nodded to him, turned, and walked toward the docking level where the human transport was waiting to take me back to Earth. Oliver was already there with our bags. He looked at me as I approached. Ready, he said. Yes, I said. The transport was a small diplomatic courier, nothing dramatic, just a clean vessel with good engines and comfortable enough seats for a 2-week journey home. I found my cabin, set my bag down, and sat at the small desk by the porthole. The station was already receding. The gas giant's rings caught the light outside, silver and enormous and completely indifferent to all of us. I took out a clean sheet of paper. Human paper, white with the faint blue watermark. I began to write. Not a report. Not a legal document. A letter, the kind that does not go into any archive, that lives only in the hands of the person who receives it. I wrote it to Gordon Webb, my old professor at the Institute, the man who had sent me a handwritten letter when my appointment was announced. I told him what had happened. Not the version that would be in the record, carefully worded and legally precise. The real version. The version with the corridor, and the corridor window, and the 11 seconds of standing still, and the 9 years of patience that had been building in the dark while people like Vorik Thane looked at a young species and decided it was manageable. I told him about Harlan Price in the room in the mountain. I told him about Suvekori's note folded in my jacket pocket. I told him about Grace Holton catching the loopholes, and Philippa Dare catching them in silence, and Oliver staying in the chair while I sat without speaking. I told him that it had not felt like triumph. That was the thing I most needed to say. It had felt like work. Important, necessary, difficult work, the kind that leaves marks on you whether you want it to or not. And at the end of it, what remained was not satisfaction exactly but something more serious. A weight. The weight of knowing that a line had been drawn, and that the line meant something, and that it now had to be maintained and honored and passed on to whoever came after me. I told him I understood now what he had meant when he said carry us well. I did not mean I had carried us perfectly. I meant I understood what the carrying required. I understood it in my body, in the 18 months of sitting still and smiling and waiting, in the exact moment of the silver rings flooding the meeting room with light while Vorik Thane read a document that changed his understanding of the world. I told him I was coming home. I finished the letter, sealed it, and wrote his name on the front in my best handwriting. I set it on the desk and looked out at the stars. The gas giant was small now. Vreth Station was a point of light. 2 weeks to Earth. I thought about what Earth would feel like. The gravity, real gravity, the kind calibrated to us over millions of years, not the slightly too heavy imitation of it on a Vreth station. The smell of actual air that had moved through actual trees. The sound of a city that was built for human ears. I thought about what I would do when I got there. Sleep for a week, probably. See my mother. Read something with no legal significance. Walk somewhere with no translation earpiece in. And then, eventually, come back to work. Because the work was not done. The amended charter was in the record, but records need people behind them. Precedents need advocates. The conclave had 41 species and would have more, and every new arrival would arrive the way humanity had arrived, young and eager and uncertain, trying to understand how the table worked and where they fit. Someone needed to be at that table for them. Someone who had been new once and knew what new felt like. I looked at the stars outside the porthole for a long time. They did not look different than they had 18 months ago, when I had first looked out at them from the window on Breath Station. Stars do not change when history does. They are patient in a way that makes even the most patient person feel hurried. I was not hurried. Not anymore. I closed my eyes. The transport hummed around me, steady and even, carrying me home through the dark between the stars. And in 16 systems across the galaxy, human fleet units were beginning their slow, documented withdrawal, every movement logged, every coordinate filed, every departure as clean and clear in the record as the arrival had been. No lingering. No posturing. We had come for a reason, and the reason was resolved, and we were going home. The record would say that humanity rose in fury. That is not quite right, though I understand why it reads that way. What humanity rose in was patience. Patience that had been storing itself for years, in dark rooms and sealed orders and shipyards on the far side of moons where nobody was looking. Fury implies reaction. What we had done was not a reaction. It was a response, the kind that takes 9 years to prepare and 1 word to begin. There is a difference. It matters. I hope the record eventually captures it. They struck a human ambassador once. The galaxy has not forgotten. Neither have I.